Today I'm going to read this book to you. It's called The Little House by Virginia Lee Burton. It's her story that I'm going to read, and it's a book that she had written of her story. Look at all the houses and all the people that are driving by this house that we're going to talk about today. The Little House, story and pictures by Virginia Lee Burton. Once upon a time, there was a little house way out in the country. She was a pretty little house, and she was strong and well built. The man who built her so well said, "This little house shall never be sold for gold or silver, and she will live to see our great-great-grandchildren living in her." This gentleman did not want it ever sold. It wanted that little house out in the country all by itself. The little house was very happy as she sat on the hill and watched the countryside around her. She watched the sun rise in the morning, see the sun? And she watched the sun set in the evening. Day followed day, each one a little different from the one before, but the little house stayed just the same. Just look at that little house. There's the barn, there's cattle. Looks like some cows may be coming in to get milked. In the nights, she watched the moon grow from a thin new moon to a full moon, then back again to a thin old moon. And when there was no moon, she watched the stars. See right up here? That's what she's talking about. See the thin moon, and it gets bigger and bigger, and then it's full, and then it goes back down to hardly anything at all. Nothing. Then she watches the stars. Way off in the distance, she watches the stars. She could see the lights of the city. The little house was curious about the city and wondered what it would be like to live there. Just see her here, sitting in the country, and off in the distance is the city where the lights are. Time passed quickly for the little house as she watched the countryside slowly change with the seasons. In the spring, when the days grew longer, the sun warmer, she waited for the first robin to return from the south. She watched the grass turn green. She watched the buds on the trees swell and the apple trees burst into bloom. She watched the children playing in the brook. Well, let's see what she's watching over here. We're going to turn in a minute, see? She watched the children playing in the brook. There is no children right now playing in the brook, but I think over here they are. There they are, playing in the brook. And the green grass and the trees up above. Here's some evergreen trees and different trees all over the site by the house. In the long summer days, she sat in the sun and watched the trees cover themselves with leaves, and the white daisies covered the hills. She watched the gardens grow, and she watched apples turn red and ripen. She watched the children swimming in the pool. Looks like I'm having a little time moving this page, but just look at that. Here's a horse and buggy there. How about that? In the fall, when the days grew shorter and the nights cooler, she watched the first frost turn leaves to bright yellow and orange and red. She watched the harvest gather and the apples picked. She watched the children going back to school. So there they are, getting ready and going back to school. I bet you this one little person is going to take them to school. But he's waiting there to take them to school, see? In the winter, when the nights were long and the days short, the countryside covered with snow, she watched the children coasting and skating. Year followed year. The apple trees grew old. New ones were planted. The children grew up and went away to the city. And now at night the lights of the city seemed brighter and closer. So she thought that the city was coming closer to where she was sitting. One day the little house was surprised to see a horseless carriage coming down the winding country road. Pretty soon there were more of them on the road and fewer carriages pulled by horses. Pretty soon along came some surveyors and surveyed a line in front of the little house. See, they're surveying down here. They're surveying the land. And the horseless carriage, was right over here, and some over here. That's pretty soon along came a steam shovel and dug a road through the hill covered with daisies. Then some trucks came and dumped big stones on the road. Then some trucks with little stones. Then some trucks with tar and sand. And finally a steamroller came and rolled it all smooth, and the road was all done. So now they made a road. See, they're having a road right there. They built a road there. There was a road, but it wasn't full of rocks and tar. It was just more of a sand road that the horses and the carriages went on. Now the little house watched the trucks and automobiles go back and forth to the city. Gasoline stations, roadside stands, and small houses followed the new road. Everyone and everything moved much faster now than it had before. Everyone was busy. See the road now that passed the house? See if we can find the road that passed the house. See? Cars going this way and cars going that way. Just look at them cars. And the little house is still there with the barn. More roads were made and the countryside was divided into lots. More houses, bigger houses, apartment houses, and tenement houses, schools, stores, and garages spread over the land and crowded around the little house. See now, look at all that. All them buildings all around her, and she's still standing right there. No one wanted to live in her and take care of her anymore. She couldn't be sold for gold or silver, so she just stayed there and watched the cars go by and the people go by. Now it was not so quiet and peaceful at night. Now the lights of the city were bright and very close, and the street lights shone all night. This must be living in the city, thought Little House, and didn't know whether she liked it or not. She missed the field of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. Now she knew what it was like to live in the city. Pretty soon there were trolley cars going back and forth in front of the little house. They went back and forth all day and part of the night. Everyone seemed to be very busy and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. We are always in a hurry now, aren't we? That was too bad that she saw everybody going past her. Pretty soon there was an elevated train going back and forth above the little house. Now here she is down in the bottom, and the train is going above her. The air was filled with dust and smoke, and the noise was so loud that it shook the little house. Now she couldn't tell when spring came, or summer, or fall, or winter. It all seemed about the same. Pretty soon there was a subway going back and forth underneath the house. See this right here? It's called a subway, and it was going underneath the house beside the trolley car there and the train on top. She couldn't see it, but she could feel and hear it. People were moving faster and faster, and nobody noticed the little house anymore. They hurried by without a glance. Pretty soon they tore down the apartment houses and tenement houses around the little house and started digging big cellars, one on each side. The steam shovels dug down 3 stories on one side and 4 stories on the other side, and pretty soon they started building up. They built up 25 stories on one side and 35 stories on the other side. Just look at all that. Everything was changing. Let's see if she really liked that. I bet she doesn't like that. Now the little house only saw the sun at noon and didn't see the moon or stars at night at all because the lights of the city were too bright. She didn't like living in the city. At night she used to dream of the country and the field of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. The little house was very sad and lonely. Her paint was cracked and dirty. Her windows were broken and her shutters hung crookedly. She looked shabby, though she was just as good a house as ever underneath. Then one fine morning in spring, along came the great-great-granddaughter of the man who built the little house so well. She saw the shabby little house, but she didn't hurry by. There was something about the little house that made her stop and look again. She said to her husband, "That little house looks just like the little house my grandmother lived in when she was a little girl. Only that little house was way out in the country on a hill, covered with daisies and apple trees growing around." See, right here they are. She's looking at the house. We're way over here. They found out that it was the very same house, so they went to the movers to see if the little house could be moved. The movers looked the little house all over and said, "Sure, this house is as good as ever. She's built so well we could move her anywhere." So they jacked up the little house and put her on wheels. Traffic was held up for hours as they slowly moved her out of the city. Just look at them moving her out of the city now. Now let's see where she's going to be going. At first the little house was frightened, but after she got used to it, she rather liked it. She rolled along the big road, and they rolled along the little roads. First it was the big roads, and then it was the little roads, until they were way out into the country. When the little house saw the green grass and heard the birds singing, she didn't feel sad anymore. They went along and along, but they couldn't seem to find just the right place. They tried the little house here. They tried the little house there. Finally, they saw a little hill in the middle of the field and apple trees growing around. "There," said the great-great-granddaughter, "that's just the place." "Yes, it is," said the little house to herself. A cellar was dug on top of the hill, and slowly they moved the house from the road to the hill. The windows and shutters were fixed, and once again they painted her a lovely shade of pink. As the little house settled down on her new foundation, she smiled happily. Once again she could watch the sun and moon and stars. Once again, she could watch spring, summer, fall, and winter come and go. Once again, she was lived in and taken care of. Never again would she be curious about the city. Never again would she want to live there. The stars twinkled above her. A new moon was coming up. It was spring, and all was quiet and peaceful in the country. This lady lived there. Her great-granddaughter lived there, and they enjoyed that little house in the country. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope you enjoy it, and God bless.